Chapter 20. When Freddie Lowndes left the Tadler office at noon on Tuesday, he was tired and high. He had put together the Tadler story on the plane to Chicago and laid it out in the composing room in 30 minutes flat. The rest of the time he had worked steadily on his paperback, brushing off all callers. He was a good organizer, and now he had 50,000 words of solid background. When the Tooth Fairy was caught, he'd do a whammo lead and an account of the capture. The background material would fit in neatly. He had arranged to have 3 of the Tadler's better reporters ready to go on short notice. Within hours of the capture, they could be digging for details wherever the Tooth Fairy lived. His agent talked very big numbers. Discussing the project with the agent ahead of time was, strictly speaking, a violation of his agreement with Crawford. All contracts and memos would be post-dated after the capture to cover that up. Crawford held a big stick. He had Lowndes' threat on tape. Interstate transmission of a threatening message was an indictable offense outside any protection Lowndes enjoyed under the First Amendment. Lowndes also knew that Crawford, with one phone call, could give him a permanent problem with the Internal Revenue Service. There were polyps of honesty in Lowndes. He had few illusions about the nature of his work, but he had developed a near-religious fervor about this project. He was obsessed with a vision of a better life on the other side of the money. Buried under all the dirt he had done, his old hopes still faced east. Now they stirred and strained to rise. Satisfied that his cameras and recording equipment were ready, he drove home to sleep for 3 hours before the flight to Washington, where he would meet Crawford near the trap. A damned nuisance in the underground garage. The black van, parked in the space next to his, was over the line. It crowded into the space clearly marked Mr. Frederick Lowndes. Lowndes opened his door hard, banging the side of the van and leaving a dent and a mark. That would teach the inconsiderate bastard. Lowndes was locking his car when the van opened behind him. He was turning, had half turned when the flat sap thocked over his ear. He got his hands up, but his knees were going, and there was tremendous pressure around his neck, and the air was shut off. When his heaving chest could fill again, it sucked chloroform. Dollarhide parked the van behind the house, climbed out and stretched. He had fought a crosswind all the way from Chicago, and his arms were tired. He studied the night sky. The 𝘈𝘰𝘓 shower was due soon, and he must not miss it. Revelation. And this tale drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them down to the earth. His doing in another time. He must see it and remember. Dollarhide unlocked the back door and made his routine search of the house. When he came outside again, he wore a stocking mask. I hope you enjoy your food, 𝘕𝘠𝘕. Yum, yum, yum. Or should I say, He opened the van and attached a ramp. Then he rolled out Freddie Lowndes. Lowndes wore nothing but his shorts and a gag and blindfold. Though he was only semi-conscious, he did not slump. He sat up very straight, his head against the high back of the old oak wheelchair. From the back of his head to the soles of his feet, he was bound into the chair with epoxy glue. 𝘓𝘁 rolled him into the house and parked him in a corner of the parlor with his back to the room, as though he had misbehaved. "Are you cool? Would you like a blanket?" 𝘓𝘁 peeled off the sanitary napkins covering Lowndes' eyes and mouth. Lowndes did not answer. The odor of chloroform hung on him. "I'll get you a blanket." 𝘓𝘁 took an Afghan from the sofa and tucked it around Lowndes up to the chin, then pressed an ammonia bottle under his nose. Lowndes' eyes opened wide on a blurring joining of walls. He coughed and started talking. "Accident? Am I hurt bad?" The voice behind him. "No, Mr. Lowndes. You'll be just fine." "My back hurts. My skin. Did I get burned? I hope to God I'm not burned." "Burned? Burned? No. You just rest here. I'll be with you in a little while." "Let me lie down. Listen, I want you to call my office. My God, I'm in a striker frame. My back's broken. Tell me the truth." Footsteps going away. "What am I doing here?" The question shrill at the end. The answer came from far behind him. "Atoning, Mr. Lowndes." Lowndes heard footsteps mounting stairs. He heard a shower running. His head was clearer now. He remembered leaving the office and driving, but he couldn't remember after that. The side of his head throbbed, and the smell of chloroform made him gag. Held rigidly erect, he was afraid he would vomit and drown. He opened his mouth wide and breathed deep. He could hear his heart. Lowndes hoped he was asleep. He tried to raise his arm from the armrest, increasing the pull deliberately until the pain in his palm and arm was enough to wake him from any dream. He was not asleep. His mind gathered speed. By straining, he could turn his eyes enough to see his arm for seconds at a time. He saw how he was fastened. This was no device to protect broken backs. This was no hospital. Someone had him. Lowndes thought he heard footsteps on the floor above, but they may have been his heartbeats. He tried to think, strained to think. "Keep cool and think," he whispered. "Keep cool and think." The stairs creaked as 𝘓𝘁 came down. Lowndes felt the weight of him in every step, a presence behind him now. Lowndes spoke several words before he could adjust the volume of his voice. I haven't seen your face. I couldn't identify you. I don't know what you look like. The Taddler. I work for the National Taddler. Would pay a reward. A big reward for me. $500,000. $1 million, maybe. $1 million. Silence behind him. Then a squeak of couch springs. He was sitting down then. What do you think, Mr. Lowndes? Put the pain and fear away and think, now, for all time, to have some time, to have years. He hasn't killed. He hasn't decided to kill me. He hasn't let me see his face. What do you think, Mr. Lowndes? I don't know what's happened to me. Do you think of who I am? Do you even know who I am, Mr. Lowndes? No, I don't want to know, believe me. According to you, I'm a vicious, perverted, sexual failure, an animal, you said, probably turned loose from an asylum by a do-good judge. Ordinarily, Dolarhyde would have avoided the syllabate S in sexual. In the presence of this audience, very far from laughter, he was freed. You know now, don't you? Don't lie. Think fast. Yes. Why do you write lies, Mr. Lowndes? Why do you say I'm crazy? Answer now. When a person does things that most people can't understand, they call him crazy. They called, like, the Wright brothers, all through history. History. Do you understand what I'm doing, Mr. Lowndes? Understand, there it was, a chance. Swing hard. No, but I think I've got an opportunity to understand, and then all my readers could understand too. Do you feel privileged? It's a privilege, but I have to tell you, man to man, that I'm scared. It's hard to concentrate when you're scared. If you have an idea, you wouldn't have to scare me for me to really be impressed. Man to man. Man to man. You use that expression to imply frankness, Mr. Lowndes. I appreciate that. But you see, I am not a man. I began as one, but by the grace of God and my own will, I have become more and other than a man. You say you're frightened. Do you believe that God is in attendance here, Mr. Lowndes? I don't know. Are you praying to him now? Sometimes I pray. I have to tell you, I just pray mostly when I'm scared. And does God help you? I don't know. I don't think about it after. I ought to. You ought to. There are so many things you ought to understand. In a while, I'll help you understand. Will you excuse me now? Certainly. Footsteps out of the room. The slide and rattle of kitchen drawer. Lowndes had covered many murders committed in kitchens where things are handy. Police reporting can change forever your views of kitchens. Water running now. Lowndes thought it must be night. Crawford and Graham were expecting him. Certainly, he had been missed by now. A great, hollow sadness pulsed briefly with his fear. Breathing behind him, a flash of white caught by his rolling eye. A hand, powerful and pale. It held a cup of tea with honey. Lowndes sipped it through a straw. "I'd do a big story," he said between sips. "Anything you want to say. Describe you any way you want. Or no description. No description." "Shh." A single finger tapped the top of his head. The lights brightened. The chair began to turn. "No, I don't want to see you." "Oh, but you must, Mr. Lowndes. You're a reporter. You're here to report. When I turn you around, open your eyes and look at me. If you won't open them, I'll staple your eyelids to your forehead." A wet mouth noise, a snapping click, and the chair spun. Lowndes faced the room, his eyes tight shut. A finger tapped instantly on his chest, a touch on his eyelids. He looked. To Lowndes, seated, he seemed very tall standing in his kimono. A stocking mask was rolled up to his nose. He turned his back to Lowndes and dropped the robe. The great back muscles flexed above the brilliant tattoo of the tail that ran down his lower back and wrapped around the leg. The dragon turned his back slowly, looked over his shoulder at Lowndes, and smiled, all jags and stains. "Oh, my dear God, Jesus," Lowndes said. Lowndes, now in the center of the room where he can see the screen. Dolarhyde, behind him, has put on his robe and put the teeth that allowed him to speak. "Do you know what I am?" Lowndes tried to nod. The chair jerked his scalp. "More than anything, I was afraid to ask." "Look." The first slide was Blake's painting, the great man-dragon, wings flared and tail lashing, poised above the woman clothed with the sun. "Do you see now?" "I see." Rapidly, Dolarhyde ran through his other slides. Click. Mrs. Jacoby alive. "Do you see?" "Yes." Click. Mrs. Leeds alive. "Do you see?" "Yes." Click. Dolarhyde. The dragon rampant, muscles flexed, and tail tattoo above the Jacoby's bed. "Do you see?" "Yes." Click. Mrs. Jacoby waiting. "Do you see?" "Yes." Click. Mrs. Jacoby after. "Do you see?" "Yes." Click. The dragon rampant. "Do you see?" "Yes." Click. Mrs. Leeds waiting, her husband slack beside her. "Do you see?" "Yes." Click. Mrs. Leeds after, harlequined with blood. "Do you see?" "Yes." Click. Friday Lowndes, a copy of a Tadler photograph. "Do you see?" "Oh, God." "Do you see?" "Oh, my God." The words drawn out as a child speaks crying.
Do you see?
Please, no.
No what?
Not me.
No what? You're a man, Mr. Lowndes. Are you a man?
Yes.
Do you imply that I'm some kind of queer?
God, no.
Are you a queer, Mr. Lowndes?
No.
Are you going to write more lies about me, Mr. Lowndes?
Oh, no. No.
Why did you write lies, Mr. Lowndes?
The police told me. It was what they said.
You quote Will Graham.
Graham told me the lies. Graham.
Will you tell the truth now about me, my work, my becoming, my art, Mr. Lowndes? Is this art?
Art.
The fear in Lowndes' face freed 𝘈𝘁 to speak, and he could fly on sibilants and fricatives. Plosives were his great webbed wings. You said I, who see more than you, am insane. I, who push the world so much farther than you, am insane. I have dared more than you. I have pressed my unique seal so much deeper in the earth, where it will last longer than your dust. Your life to mine is a slug track on stone, a thin silver mucus track in and out of the words on my momentum. The words 𝘈𝘁 had written in his journal swarmed in him now. I am the train, and you call me insane. My movements are followed and recorded as avidly as those of a mighty guest star. Do you know about the guest star in 1054? Of course not. Your readers follow you like a child follows a slug trail with its finger, and in the same tired loops of racing. But you, to your shallow skull and potato face, as a slug follows his own slime back home. Before me, you are a slug in the sun. You are privy to a great becoming, and you recognize nothing. You are an ant in the afterbirth. It is in your nature to do one thing correctly. Before me, you rightly tremble. Fear is not what you owe me, Mr. Lowndes. You and the other Pismires. You owe me all. 𝘈𝘁 stood with his head down, his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. Then he left the room.
He didn't take off his mask. Lowndes thought. He didn't take off the mask. If he comes back with it off, I'm dead. God, I'm wet all over.
He rolled his eyes toward the doorway and waited through the sounds from the back of the house. When 𝘈𝘁 returned, he still wore the mask. He carried a lunchbox and 2 thermoses.
For your trip back home.
He held up a thermos. Ice. We'll need that. Before we go, we'll tape a little while. He clipped a microphone to the Afghan near Freddie's face.
Repeat after me. They taped for half an hour. Finally, "That's all, Mr. Lowndes. You did very well. You'll let me go now?" "I will. There's one way, though, that I can help you understand and remember." Dollarhide turned away. "I want to understand. I want you to know that I appreciate you turning me loose. I really am going to be fair. From now on, you know that." Dollarhide could not answer. He had changed his teeth. The tape recorder was running again. He smiled at Lowndes. A brown-stained smile. He placed his hand on Lowndes' heart and leaning to him intimately as though to kiss him, but he bit Lowndes off by the lips and spit them on the floor.